server. I do believe everyone is in. Let's have a oh, let's have a look. I think everyone is coming in. So hello and welcome everyone. Yeah, just going to obviously give it a couple more minutes and then before we will start. So I am joined by Lily, but also George or Dr. George Thomas here. So just going to wait for a couple more minutes to let people in. If you'd like to say hello to everyone onto the chat, that'd be great. And please ensure that you've got a pen and paper in front of you to take some notes. And any questions you do have, leave it to the end. So we'll give a couple minutes and then we'll get started. I'll give about, George, you reckon we'll give about 3 minutes, 2 minutes, or should we get started?
I usually give a couple of minutes for
Couple
people to
minutes.
trickle in, I think, and
Yeah,
you know,
cool.
like me, sort out Zoom issues.
Yeah, it's all good. All right.
I feel like this will hold music be really good.
All right. We're all good. George, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get started. Lily, you all ready? All good? Oh, I think she's gone. Let's start. Beautiful. All right. Hello, and everyone, and thank you for joining us for the third webinar of the introduction to CompTIA and SecAI Plus. And obviously, it's a short course presented by IT Masters on behalf of the Charles Sturt University. My name is Terry Magalakis, and I will be your MC for this webinar. And obviously, as always, your mentor, Dr. George Thomas, will be presenting for today. And as you may be aware, this is my first time hosting, so do bear with me as we work through this evening. So, obviously, welcome to all of you, and we hope that you are all safe and sound. Now, obviously, before we do begin, there is some housekeeping we must do. So, give me one moment. Make sure you chat to everyone. Yeah, beautiful. Okay. So, just want to check. Okay, fantastic. All right, so all webinars for this course will be held at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, with the recordings made for those who cannot attend on this given occasion. And despite this, if you can make it, we hope you'll attend the live webinars and contribute to a collaborative learning environment. And we quite clearly use Zoom for our webinars, encourage questions and the use of chat during these webinars. So please, we ask that you direct all questions relevant to the course content to the Q&A section in Zoom, and that you send all of your administration type questions such as dates and times, as well as resource availability and the like to support team in your chat as well. You can also chat with the panelists only, or to all of your fellow students as well. You can make that choice by toggling through the drop there's the drop down box once you have opened the chat log. And there are usually some very experienced industry-based attendees who will be the most helpful with these inquiries or queries you may have. So especially in technical courses like this one. So we will have Q&A sessions at the end of these webinars, or if you have a question particularly relevant, I will interject during George's discussion. And for those who've never taken part of an initial course with us, IT Masters is a training organization that exists as a partner for Charles Sturt University and who we work with to create and deliver a number of master courses. So we also market these courses on their behalf and hope that the best way to do this is to give some away for free. So if we do a good enough job, then students will be encouraged to enroll in the full masters if it ever suits them. So with that said, we want this course to be obviously useful and rewarding exercise. So we want you to learn some interesting stuff or information and have some fun and hopefully make connections with some other fellow students. So today, very nearly about 2,000 people have enrolled into this course, so you're spoiled for choice in a way. So remember to obviously troll around the discussion forums and say hello to there too, and a lot of people are there. So don't, like I said, don't be afraid to ask any questions you may have around this. We've got Lil is around for tonight in the administrative and technical support role for IT Masters. So she looks after the chat and will answer any access related questions in the chat. So she's also responsible for the learn.itmasters.edu.au website, which is where you'll find sort of the other materials needed for this course, and that includes links to the readings, discussion forums, and also quizzes. So if you have any questions tonight or later on, please feel free to contact us using the details on that page. So this week, I'd like to let you know that there is a course satisfaction survey available in the learn.itmasters.edu.au course site, right down the bottom of the menu. So that is the portal that a lot of students go onto and they've signed up. So please take a minute to complete it when you can, either this week or next week. And it's obviously important to us in helping to design future courses. So, and to check in to see what we have on offer and obviously what attracts you to these courses as well. So again, please say hello and g'day to the chat, and also welcome George as well to let us know where you're from. And obviously, while everyone's obviously making themselves at home, we'll wait a couple more minutes. Obviously, I know they've done that already, but we'll give it a couple more minutes. But also feel free to give us an answer to the poll or type something in there too as well of any questions you may have. Normally, I just leave you to chat amongst yourselves while we wait, but tonight I'd like to remind you of our current special offer that we do have going. And obviously, to celebrate the launch of the SEC or the SecAI Plus certification, we are offering 25% off all CompTIA products on our ITM store until the end of May. So we have about 12 to 15 certs and their associated courses on the store, and we can access anything that you want. So if you ever want something that you don't see, just write to us in the discount request form and add it to a note that there, as what you might be looking for moving forward. So to obtain your discount coupon code, fill in the form at the store or email us at shortcourses@itmasters.edu.au. And I do believe Lil has put that in. So we will then obviously mail that out to you, and you can apply on the checkout page. So obviously enough from me. So it looks like pretty much all that aside now, looks like we can get ready to go. So let's welcome George. And George, I'll let you take it away. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Terry.
No worries.
I am going to, or should I do it? I was just saying I've got some computer troubles. I'm traveling at the moment. Well,
Hmm.
let's give it a crack. I'll put the video on and
Yep.
hopefully
Yeah.
it keeps working.
Yeah.
So what was I going to say? So look, welcome back everyone to week three. So week three of four. So next week being our final week. Um, and yeah, look, tonight we're going to look at AI assisted security. So, let's see, push the button, nothing happened. Hang on. There we go.
Yep.
So, week one, we looked at basic AI concepts relating to cybersecurity. Week two, so last week, we looked at securing AI systems. Um, And this week we're looking at how AI can be, I guess, used or leveraged as part of cybersecurity. And I think it's important to kind of lay this out at the beginning. Um, this is from, I guess, almost both an attack and defense um, perspective. So, looking at how particular AI tools can be used to, protect an environment, as well as how they can be used for, I guess, offensive, whether that be by, kind of red team type folks, or whether that be by malicious threat actors. So, yeah, today what we'll do is we'll cover off how to use, well, very high level again, we've only got an hour, but using AI-enabled tools for security tasks, looking at some of those AI-enabled and AI-enhanced attack vectors, and you're probably familiar with a few of those already. And then looking at how AI can be used to automate security tasks. So that's kind of what we're going to cover in the next sort of 40 minutes or so. So we'll start with using AI-enabled tools for security tasks. And yeah, if I sit there like looking, I've got like my screen's tiny. This laptop's like 10-inch screen, so binoculars. Um, right now, just going to minimize this. I need more screen real estate. All right, so looking at enabling or AI-enabled tools for security tasks, really what we're kind of, what I'm sort of saying here, and if we look at the SecAI plus content, and again, probably what is obvious to probably everybody, is that it's really starting to, and the word that's used on the deck is revolutionize security tasks. So, security tasks, concepts, you know, very, very not different, sort of a lot of the same things, but a lot of enhanced capabilities, I guess, is what I'm getting at as a result of kind of the rise of AI. So what we're seeing is AI is really helping with things like speed, scale, and also the ability for it to identify. So things like pattern finding and so forth. So in terms of speed, that means, reduced time in terms of things like being able to identify um, potential threats in an environment. In terms of volume, I think I mentioned previously, you remember those 1 million alerts? That's a lot for an individual or, even a team of analysts to go through. You've got things like, alert fatigue and just general fatigue. The I guess likelihood of missing something is potentially a lot higher when having to do this in a more manual way, opposed to the use of AI, which can consume huge amounts of data. Having said that, I think it's also important to understand or to be aware that those good outcomes really depend on quality input. So you probably heard of the garbage in, garbage out phrase or saying or analogy, whatever it is. That's really important here as well. So when thinking about what type of data AI needs to consume, it needs to be, at least in some sort of clean format, because if you're putting in rubbish, then, it's going to end up causing problems. On top of that, the quality inputs will be combined with things like, the tuning, and we've talked about tuning before. So, those adjustments to make sure that, the outputs are, valid and correct. So that kind of, verification process, which then does lend itself back to, human review. So there's a human in the loop that's involved in doing that. But I think the key thing here is that it does help in terms of dealing with, the volume and the speed and so forth. So it really is a complementary tool, obviously a very powerful one. So if we look at some of the common use cases that are listed here, automate monitoring for suspicious behavior. So again, the ability for AI to identify things like indicators of compromise and so forth, or if something is not quite right. So, as I said, there's been for many years now, at least over a decade. In fact, I think that was when I first wrote a paper on this around, user behavior analysis, um, using machine learning, but those types of things. Performing rapid analysis of security events. I think I've talked that one to death. Also conducting penetration testing with intelligent automation, and we will get into that in a little bit more detail afterwards. And then, streamlining management of security incidents. And so we will get into that a little bit more too. Um, so AI is it is important for IT and cyber SecOps. And so, as I mentioned, it's this whole ability to detect, analyze, and identify. So detect is, finding a problem or finding, as I said, an indicator of compromise or, as I said, a lot of this data heavy, mundane stuff. That's the sort of detection process. Analysis is basically its ability to interpret that to say, oh, um, this looks like a phishing threat. And then, identification. So, what can that attribute it to? So, I guess it's become really widely used now in many kind of security operations environments. Certainly, there are tools like Azure with AI Ops. That has the ability to identify root causes of outages. Um, it results in shorter outages because it's more, I guess, proactive. Um, there's fewer false positives that can that are a result of this. So obviously it's better for staffing as well. Um, Having said that, it's not perfect. There are potential trade-offs. Things like false positives do occur, which I think again emphasizes the need for tuning. And false negatives can also occur. So false negatives. So maybe I should explain that. So basically, a false positive is something that is flagged as being true. So, for example, say the AI flags that there's an indicator of compromise when there isn't. So that is a false positive. Now, what that does is that would result in an analyst or whoever, an responder going in and investigating that when there is actually no problem in the first place. So that's a waste of time. Having said that, if we talk about the feedback loop, it's not entirely a waste of time because then you go back and flag that as a false positive so that the model can learn from that and not do that again. False negative, which is the probably worst one, is where it doesn't see there's a problem when there is a problem. And so that could create risk because what you're ending up with is a situation where it hasn't flagged something. And let's say there is a threat actor in there and the AI and by the way, this happens with people as well. But it basically says, oh, there's nothing wrong here, nothing to see when there is something to see, and then that could obviously get that could escalate. So as I said, that really does emphasize that importance around tuning, providing that feedback so that AI can learn from that human input, be more accurate, be faster, and perform better. If we look at some of the other, uses here, I know these are still categorized as AI tools in SecOps, but the integration, and I use this, the integration of AI into IDE. So IDE, maybe someone can put this in the chat. I'm pretty sure it's integrated development environment. Basically, anyone that uses VS Code or Visual Studio or any type of, sort of programming application where you've got your code and your files, that's an IDE, right? And so there are AI tools now that are basically plugins that bolt straight into things like Visual Studio Code or VS Code or Visual Studio 2020. What are we up to now? 2026, 2022, one of them. And basically they could do code generation, right? They could do code generation, they could do refactoring, they could do things like identify bugs and so forth. Now, these are really good because they have the capability to flag risks as code is being developed. They can also obviously help, do things like completion and so forth and maintain, good practices and that sort of thing. But what's happening here is these tools allow the ability to identify any issues and to minimize those issues from being released because you're dealing with it at the point that the code's being written. And so there's a few plugin examples there. So Tab 9 and Codium, those are I've not used either of those to be honest, but there's also like Claude, Copilot, and so forth. Those I have used. Um, and yeah, is that Amazon's Code Whisperer? I've not used that one. Um, but there's also some others as well. So, Snyk has Code AI. So Snyk's been a pretty big sort of, DevOps security, security developer security platform for identifying, vulnerabilities within software applications. They've got a Code AI. Microsoft Defender has one as well, and then your GitHub has one as well. But yeah, so these things can call things out like, bad authentication or, risky libraries. So again, for anyone that's, developed code, you often what's the word? Rely on like third-party libraries and things like that. So think about as an example, if I was writing a bit of code and I wanted to send a text message, then I might put in a Twilio library, for example. Likewise, if I was collecting payments, maybe there's a Stripe one. I don't know. But something like that, right? And so that's pretty common. And if there's a risky one, then AI can be used to flag that. Um, cool. There's also the integration with things like command line interfaces. So again, complex command generation, it says here, can be taken care of um, by AI. One of the ones that was interesting here was AI Git. So again, and sorry, there's a bit of jargon going on here, but Git is basically like what is it, like a source code repository. It does more than that, but effectively, if you're again a developer and you're writing code, you'd commit it to Git, and it's going to manage your code and things like that. What I was just thinking of the use case here with something like AI commit, sorry, AI commits for Git is, and I've been guilty of this. When you commit code, you basically put a narrative in, kind of like, to describe what the change is, right? And, I'm sure on at least one occasion I may have just typed in something like bug fixes, which is not very descriptive. So using something like AI commits can actually look at what you've written and then create a more descriptive um, explanation of what you've done and then commit it rather, and obviously, which is good because then when someone goes back through, or even when you go back through yourself and go, what on earth happened here? It will do that for you. So yeah, that's another use case there. We've also got chatbots and personal assistants. Um, Basically, when we talk about chatbots and PAs, and we talk about it and so a little bit different here. PAs, we often think about, Alexa, and I almost said it, and I know my phone was going to light up, but the one that starts with S, and and so forth. Here we're talking about those used for security operations. You'll see a lot of these are going to, have been embedded into things like SIEM platforms. I think we talked about SIEMs maybe a couple of weeks ago. SOAR platforms, so they're the security orchestration platforms for like automation and so forth. They're also in collaboration tools like, Teams and Slack and so forth. And there are, security aware assistants that are now available that can, train on information like security telemetry, playbooks, any past incidents that are recorded, policies, and those sorts of things. So you'll see, there's quite a few examples of that. Microsoft Copilot for Security might be one of those. What you can see in there, and I know someone mentioned about hallucinations last week, but or rather fabrications, but I will say that, the SecAI Plus does refer to them as hallucinations. So just for consistency with the material, we'll go with that. But basically making stuff up. But that is another risk. I mean, that's something that's going to happen across every use case of AI. And basically it could provide, inaccurate responses, inaccurate code. It certainly does do that. Sometimes, if the prompt is not clear enough, it can give you who knows what. So yeah, there very much again, there's the reliance on somebody to basically quality assure. And I always talk about, when we talk about AI and AI is going to replace blah, it's like there's still a level of quality assurance to responsibly use it. Because yeah, if you just kind of point and shoot, it often does suffer from drawbacks like, errors and inaccuracies and things like that. Um, Having said that, you then provide the feedback and you kind of keep training it, so it will get better. Um, one second, I'm just going to have a sip of water. All right, cool. What else were we talking about? So chatbots. Okay, so looking at MCP, so Model Context Protocol. I've been playing with this recently, quite a bit. So basically, it's an emerging standard. It's an open standard. I can't remember where it came from. Was it Anthropic? One of them. And what it basically does is it defines, I guess, it defines kind of like discovery and access and use for AI models. And so it's used to like, connect to other, I guess, systems and things like that. Look, the example that I used it for was I used it to integrate to a source code repository. So I used MCP. Then I had my AI connect to the MCP, and then the MCP basically kind of brokered that connection. And so before that, every tool needed a custom integration to connect to everything else. So if you wanted to connect, you know, I don't know, let's say ChatGPT to, and obviously someone would have probably created something, but in the early days when things didn't exist, you need to create a custom integration to get that to work. So MCP is kind of done to standardize that and to provide, as it says there, that common language for exchanging that information. So now it makes it really easy for those, AI technologies to interact with, other technologies and platforms and so forth. Um, Now, what is interesting though, as you see there, it has risks, so it could create broader surface for content leakage. And so when you think about, I was talking about the source code thing, when setting that up, it's not like I went, oh, you could just have access to absolutely everything and off you go. I was very specific. I was like, oh, you can access this particular repository and you only get read-only access to that repository. So it's really important to consider those things when configuring something like this, because yeah, you don't want it to just go, full blown, go access whatever and do whatever. So, we talk about the least privilege concepts or practices, and so definitely that applies here as well. Um, yeah, if we look at some examples of this, integrating using MCP to other systems. If you think about AI agents that might have the ability to, open tickets in another system or investigate or query databases, those are the sorts of things that could be use cases for this. Also, as I said, integrating something like a SAW for doing, remediation steps and so forth. As I said, I use it for Git, but yeah, those are just some examples of where MCP can be used. And as I said, I mean, I've been using it and it works quite well. Um, So if we look at some of the historical use cases here, looking at, Cisco's, I say historical use of AI, so Cisco's Splunk. I mean, yes, Cisco owns Splunk, but I think when we talk about historical, they didn't, but now they do. And Sentinel, so Microsoft's SIEM platform. But basically, they used to use signature matching. So basically, signature matching at a very high level is um, looking for a malicious, I guess, what's the word? I mean, I'm trying to get the word hash into here, kind of like fingerprint signature, basically something that is known to be malicious, or a malicious command, and identifying that based on a database of known malicious things, so to speak. And so that's kind of how it used to be, right? So it'd see some sort of behavior. And if anyone ever used Snort, similar thing. It's got like rules that will say, oh, like when you see this, this is malicious. And so that's how it used to kind of work. Obviously, nowadays it's a lot more advanced than that. It learns, when it, sees things that it hasn't seen before. It has the ability to identify those. Again, you may end up with, false positives or false negatives, but then feedback loop, provide that feedback, help train the model. Um, right. So we also have things like code quality. So the use of AI can be used to help, improve code quality, do code reviews. So in other words, you can ask the AI to review the code and make suggestions. You can ask it to comment for you, all those sorts of things. Um, as it says here, like it can enhance the detection of security flaws, and it does do effectively SAST. So SAST being static application security testing opposed to dynamic application security testing is really about looking at source code. So when you do, and SAST and DAST have been part of, good um, development practice for years. But it used to be that with SAST, you would, and there were tools that did it, like Veracode might be one that I remember. But also, you'd have engineers do it as well. So you'd have like a senior engineer go and do code reviews and things like that. And that's not to say that that still shouldn't be done, but this can again help take some of the heavy lifting and identify, some areas that need to be improved or that, don't meet requirements or potential security vulnerabilities. So yeah, effectively doing these code reviews using AI, um, and sort of cleaning things up and blocking any risks before they go to production. Um, cool. So we got here. Can't read that. Okay, so we're looking at detection and analysis. So anomaly detection, this is kind of what I was talking about before. So anomaly detection basically being identifying where things fall outside what is considered normal. So again, the AI learns what is normal. And then when there's some sort of outlier, that would be considered an anomaly. And it could do that, as it says here, through evaluating, traffic flows and communications across networks. Again, there needs to be some either integration into a piece of hardware or, it's taking it from logs or whatnot. So maybe from like, NetFlow or something like that. And then it's identifying, those patterns. Um, and obviously that will then play a critical role in things like fraud detection. So fraud detection is used with anomaly detection. And again, that's where there's going to be some sort of weird behavior. Um, and so some things when we talk about, and when I talk about anomaly and fraud, I don't necessarily mean like, banking type stuff. It can be anything. So if you think about, some key baselines that might want to be, um, I guess, tracked, things like, and I think I might have mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, impossible travel. So impossible travel might be a useful one where you sort of track how a user particular, usually behaves. So in other words, they're, let's say, I don't know, Joe Blogs, very original name. Joe Bloggs normally logs in from the Brisbane office Monday to um, Friday at 9 a.m. And then all of a sudden they logged in from like London, um, maybe like, 10 minutes after they logged in from Brisbane. That's going to be impossible travel. Like it's not possible unless they've got a teleporter to go from that location to another location. Yes, I know maybe they VPN'd in for some reason, but again, that would flag an impossible travel um, sort of, what's the word? Not violation, but yes, that will flag an impossible travel type of rule. Maybe unusual API call volumes. That might be another thing where you could sort of the AI learns what's sort of normal. Oh, we get like Monday morning's really busy. We get 50,000 requests, and then it sort of peters down throughout the day. And Tuesday looks like this, but all of a sudden there's an unusual volume, and so because it learns, it has the ability to identify that. So maybe it's potential that your service is under attack. Again, it can potentially to flag that. So those are some examples of where it could be used. We've also got vulnerability assessments and analysis. So again, this is very time consuming. Um, you can leverage AI to go and deal with this. Um, Basically, it's going to be used to assist analysts. And what it can also do, because this is also very time consuming, is it can help with the remediation and the prioritization process. So yes, we know when you do a vulnerability scan, you get like CVSS scores and things like that. So CVSS scores are effectively the score common vulnerability scoring system, and it's what is it like from 1 to 10? 10 being like an extreme critical risk, as in, exploited and bad. One being, you know, yeah, okay, well, it's a vulnerability, but it's not likely to be exploited and it's probably not that bad. Um, Now, there's also a lot of context that goes into things as well, and that's often done manually. So, and when I say that is if I, as a security analyst, see a CVSS 10, and that's because it's being exploited in the wild on publicly facing web servers, and by the way, vulnerability scan tools often will just go, oh, it's a 10, right? Not taking into account where it is and what it's used for and so forth. Then my point is if it's a 10, but let's say it's in a internal network, you know, basically almost sandboxed, then maybe the risk to the organization is lower. So having that context and using AI to feed it that context could help by saying, well, okay, this is a 10, but based on your environment, um, it doesn't need to have top priority. Like it could be a little bit further down. Yes, you should do it, but deal with these other things first. Same thing. I've seen, scores that are low where it's like, well, hang on a minute, based on the information that's in there, that should be a lot higher. So yeah, okay, they've got access to enumerate files on a file server that's not secured properly. But it's all sensitive files. In other words, you should fix that now. So it will help, with that prioritization process. There's also the capability for it to do automated penetration testing. Um, Again, this is something that has been done for many years by, people manually. And again, yes, there's still a requirement for that. And I think here this is about helping be more thorough because, again, pen testing can be quite expensive. It often will be scoped to something particular, usually because cost is a factor. So this would potentially help do broader tests. Again, got to be very careful, you don't break anything. But this is where, and again, really important around the governance piece. I should mention that. So, because you're basically letting a tool go and, that learns go and do stuff, you got to make sure that it is scoped, that there is logging, so you kind of know what's happening here and what it got access to, and you got to make sure that you avoid any disruption to production systems and so forth. So make sure that's considered. But there are, automated pen test tools out there, Pentera, Horizon 3. I think even Darktrace have a tool now that can help do penetration testing of systems using AI. Um, I might pause for a minute. Do we have any questions? And yeah, sorry, I'm down to one screen, so I can't really see anything.
That's right. Let's have a look here. So we do have four questions in the QA. I've got here from Martin. I've got here, hi George. What are your thoughts on Claude Mythos? If this or another similar model became publicly available, what impact do you think it would have for the cybersecurity professionals?
Oh, that was the one I was meant to get back on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, I'm still kind of on the fence. I think almost it is kind of the you know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are going that way.
Hmm.
Like I think we're
Yeah.
going to get there anyway. If Anthropic don't do it, someone else will.
Yeah.
Um, I see like yeah the pros and cons for releasing it out in the wild sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, I still think that there's going to be need for cyber professionals, at least, and I know, Claude Mythos is meant to be exceptionally powerful and so forth, but I think we're still at the point where there needs to be some oversight.
Mm.
Um, unless that's just my opinion, but I'm not, I don't think I'm quite comfortable in just letting
Mm.
things deal with themselves. I mean, I've seen all the movies,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but yeah, it is a bit of a double-edged sword, that one.
Mm. Absolutely.
I'd be interested to see what others think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Next one we've got here from Andrew Forrest. How long until coders are redundant?
Oh,
That's a tough question. Yeah.
it is a tough question. And
Yeah.
look, I'll answer it honestly.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that coders are going to be redundant, but I think it's going to be a matter of adapting.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because I'm a pretty small operation myself,
Hmm.
and I do write code.
Hmm.
But I've used some of the tools to, I guess, what's the word? Augment my
Hmm.
abilities. They're like superpowers almost. And they do a very, very good job. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. They're not yet. But they do a very good job. But that could just be me as well. Maybe I'm just feeding it garbage. But yeah, look, certainly I think it's more a case of adapting to um, using the tools.
Hmm.
I think the days of writing every single line of code
Hmm.
yourself,
Hmm.
that's probably less of those days left. But certainly, I've still had to go fix stuff. I still have to review it. I still need to, do these things, but it does create some massive efficiencies. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Okay.
not yet, but again, I think the quality piece, you still need a
Yeah.
person to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Adaptability, pretty much.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Next one we've got here. We'll go. Oh, hang on. Let's have a look here. We'll put that as done. We've got Steve. In Sec AI, is defensive AI currently winning the war against offensive AI? And if so, could this change in the future? Is this different to companies compared to individuals?
Is defensive AI currently winning the war
War
against?
against offensive AI.
I feel like we've just sort of, no, I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to who's winning. I just know
Mm.
that both sides are using AI. So you've almost got like robots fighting each other a little bit. I mean, it is a bit like that.
Yeah.
I feel like if I think about the interactions that I've had and the incidents that I've had to deal with, I feel like the offensive AI piece, um, I'm not going to
Mm.
say it's winning, but there's a lot of it being used to conduct. campaigns, by threat actors, and they're becoming harder and harder to spot. Um, and what I'm getting at is, and I think, you know what, I'm thinking it's probably a little bit unbalanced. So in a larger enterprise space where, you've got a lot of, typically, big security budgets and, CISOs and, big security teams and that, can make the investments in defensive AI, they're probably in a pretty good position. But what I'm thinking about is there's a lot of small operators that probably don't have those capabilities. And certainly in those environments,
Mm.
I'm probably seeing a lot more of the offensive stuff kind of taking over because, they're not going, oh, I'm going to go put in this to try and, protect because, they're much smaller organizations.
Mm.
But the threat actors are definitely using it. And I know they're using it, like, because I often will get them sent to me going, hey, is this legit? And I'm like, no, but that's very good phishing
Mm.
message. To like the whole thing end to end, like as in the way it started, and they're kind of trying
Yeah.
to get the hook in and then redirecting them, and the content that's being displayed when I'm like, wow, that is like really impressive.
Yeah.
Um, Impressive in a bad way, but
Mm.
yeah. So I think it just depends.
Yeah, absolutely. Next one we've got, I think, Andrew Forrest again. What will be the new career path for SOC analyst when the junior roles are passed to AI tools?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it's just interesting. Like obviously, Andrew Forrest, I know you're listening to us. Obviously, great questions. It's something that we don't want to give. I'm guessing, George, we don't want to give 110%. Like, oh, this is the answer, because it changes. It,
well,
it
as I
changes
thought,
so
I
many
think
times.
we'll
Yeah.
adapt. I think
Yeah.
again, it's an all. Someone still needs to review stuff as well. So that's what I was saying before.
Yeah.
Someone needs to provide the feedback. So you can, right now where we are, and look, I can't talk about where we're going to be in 5 years' time, but right now there's still that element of
Mm.
false results.
Yeah.
Um, What it's doing though is it means that there's greater, to me, it's like there's greater efficiency. So rather than, I'll keep going back to the 1 million bloody events. Were you here for that?
I think so.
It was
Yes.
where I was working with a client that had 1 million SOC alerts.
Wow.
And
Gee.
well, it's
That's
just because it's the same thing, like alert fatigue. No one looked at them. So someone had
yeah.
to go through and review each one of them. And that was like
Oh.
a few people that had to go do that. Nowadays, you wouldn't need to do that. You would just go, okay, you've got model, train the model, point it up there, look for things that are, indicators of
Mm-hmm.
compromise or things that we need to investigate further. My point is, once that's done and it's kind of spat out okay, here's a list of things that you should go and look at, rather than
Mm-hmm.
you know, someone having to do that, then that's where I think, there's still a place for those roles. They've got to go and do the investigation. You know,
Yes.
is that a
Yeah.
is that valid? Is it not?
Hmm.
Those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I should probably keep going.
Yeah, we'll wait for the Mishivi and Kahindri. I know I've got two questions here, so wait until the end to answer those. So yeah, we'll continue on.
Yeah. All right.
Beautiful.
How do I get rid of this?
Yeah, have you got AI use cases, testing and management slide in front of you, George?
I do. I'm trying to get
Yeah.
rid of the Q&A box. There we
Oh,
go. I
there
just
we go.
click the
Beautiful.
X. Like the
Hmm.
minimize doesn't do anything.
Okay.
Um, all right. Did I talk about this already?
Yes, I think you do.
Yeah, I
I do
did.
believe you did. Yeah.
I did.
Hmm.
Um, Righto. So, incident management. Yeah, I kind of talked about that just almost then. But
Hmm.
basically, analyzing timelines, mitigating controls, all those sorts of things. So what we have here is when we talk about incident management, so say something occurs, AI can be used to, draft timelines, summarize evidence, suggest next steps to take. And then you'll have again, and it's kind of going back to that last question. You could have a human that's, in the chain that will then approve those actions. So while AI will, I think we're not probably at the stage yet where we're kind of trusted to go and do the thing like completely automated. It's a case of, it will do all the heavy stuff, right? Um, Summarize, tell what to do, present some action options, and then someone will need to review that and make a decision and then approve it. Um, So also, things like threat modeling, things like evidence handling, we can use AI to deal with that. We've also got, I'm just looking at the time, I always talk so much. Um, Translation. So basically, this is about taking sort of almost the summary piece from before, but taking the raw security data. So if you think about security logs, right? Lots and lots of very not well, lots of less useful information in terms of being able to read it. So, date stamps, time stamps, error numbers, those sorts of things, IP addresses. What AI could do is it can translate that into something that is more human understandable and provides more insight. So, provide some narratives and those sorts of things. So effectively, translate those logs and alerts and those metrics into more useful outputs. So for example, it could take a firewall log, it could take some, telemetry from an endpoint, and then translate that into, something that say, oh, this looks like I don't know, this looks like a phishing attempt, which then, you know, was successful and resulted in some lateral movement between these two machines. I'm sure it's going to be more articulate than what I just said, but you get the picture. So that helps with that interpretation piece. When you're trying to build that story of like what happened, you can use AI to help deal with that. All right, so AI enabled and AI enhanced attack vectors. So this is one of the exam objectives. So the exam objective being explain how AI enables or enhances attack vectors. So we talked about this before. Um, Again, kind of a bit of the Q&A question about how it could be used to conduct attacks. And so there are definitely real risks around AI supported attacks. And they can, as it says here, significantly enable and enhance various attack vectors. As I said, I was literally responding to one last week and I was like, as I said, this looks pretty legit. I mean, to me, I spotted straight away that it wasn't, and it wasn't like the URL was off, but everything else looked perfect, even to the point where the authentication process, which wasn't really an authentication process, followed what you would expect if you were trying to get access to this particular website, like MFA, sort of and all. But instead of doing the push to an authenticator, it was more of a text thing. But yeah, it was pretty impressive. And so it could also do things like aid in recon and data collection. So rather than having to, the kind of almost the open source intelligence stuff. So rather than, having to go out and do it manually, and yes, there are tools out there like Maltego and stuff like that. But it's a lot quicker just to ask in a prompt to do it. And then it provides the ability to automate large scale attacks. And I've seen quite a few of these in my time where it's not quite malmerged, but effectively, so messages can be tailored for, the one campaign, but for different people based on, context and things like that. We've also got AI generated content, so deep fakes. I think we talked about these a couple of weeks ago. Creating videos and phishing attacks and so forth that basically leverage real, you know, almost personas. So they look like people. They create trust. Obviously, videos are going to create more trust nowadays than, well, maybe not so much anymore, but then certainly than an email request, um, especially one that just says, "Are you free?" followed by, "Oh, I need 50 gift cards. I'll pay you back tomorrow." Um, so here, there's a lot more trust when it's, face-to-face video, or, some sort of video call. But, this is where it's really important to think about some of those verification steps. And I think someone did ask about this a couple of weeks ago, but, the verification steps to help mitigate deep fakes. So things like, out of band verification. So obviously something that's agreed, especially for those high risk actions like $25 million transfers, pre-agreed sort of, passphrases and processes. One thing that was interesting, and I thought about this because I actually did it. I didn't do it to trick anybody. Did it as part of it. I've got a screenshot in a minute. But the publishing or the public availability of executive like photos, videos, audio should be limited because they can be used to create deep fakes. Obviously, and training on deepfake scenarios would be another one to definitely look at. And I think, we used to always say, oh, well, their lips are out of sync or whatever. Well, that's no longer reliable, right? So yeah, can't just sit there and go, oh, their lips are in sync, therefore, everything's fine. So as I said, impersonation. So deep fakes can create those personas. They can impersonate executives. They can also be used, in the social engineering context to provide misinformation, disinformation, and things like that. It's actually pretty annoying now when you kind of go on there. I'm like, is that real? Can that cat really play the violin? Um, I know that that's not real, but yeah, it could be hard to distinguish whether something is or not. Um, and then obviously that can have very, very large impact depending on the audience and how many people that goes to. We also have adversarial networks. So basically, generative adversarial networks or GANs. They're, basically machine learning models that are designed to generate realistic data, and they learn patterns um, from existing data sets, and they usually could consist of two neural networks to do that. And so I'm just conscious of time as well because I was trying to find it's coming up. But so here's a bit of a process here. So you could see that it's not a very good photo, but well, it's not a photo at all. But the flow here is you've got some images of a samples of a real person. It goes through the AI, which adds some random noise and generates a face, and then you've got the discriminator on the right there, which is used to distinguish real data from fake data. Um, and so the discriminator basically will train using real and fake data and then, um, identify whether it's a real or fake image. So that's some of the, sort of defense steps here. So from the attacker's side, they're taking that sample of the real face. They're then generating a deep fake, but then you'd use your discriminator to try and identify whether that was real or not. Um, There's also some obfuscation techniques. So obfuscation is just around making things difficult to process or understand. Um, and yeah, it's just about the outcome being the same, but the code is modified. So it's kind of, obfuscation is I'm trying to think of how to describe this, but if you look at things like signatures, so signature and pattern recognition is based on the use of something that is known. So if you obfuscate it, so it's different. And certainly AI can be used to obfuscate things, then they won't get detected by those. So here's one I did a couple of years ago. That is actually me on the left and the right. Can you tell? But basically, I did this as part of a security awareness training video for deepfakes, effectively. Well, no, actually for deepfakes a couple of years ago for a client. And all I used was a photo that I found on a public website. And then obviously I got changed, but I realized after that I should have just kept the clothes, the suit on because it actually cut to me sitting in the same chair. But when you, I didn't change the voice. So you know, when the left video was going, it was still sounded like me and it just cut to me with the same voice. But it does show that it's um, not that difficult to do. Um, So the other things we could use AI for, and I sort of mentioned this before when I'm talking about data collection and OSINT and so forth, is the recon piece. So using it for OSINT, so gathering open source intelligence to build out profiles can be used. So there's two things here. It can be used by threat actors for the purposes of conducting attacks on targets. Or it can also be used to gather information from a defensive perspective. So as an organization that might, that has, executives and so forth, you can use this particular, we can use AI as recon to work out what their profile looks like. What does their online profile look like, and identify where there are potential risks. So what it does is it allows for, a lot faster identification and summarization of that content. And then it could also potentially be used to suggest what they need to do. So yeah, it's pretty powerful in that respect. Wow, I'm just looking, I still have a lot of slides. Um, so I can read that. Oh, okay. So attack vector discovery. So again, using it as part of, if we look at the recon and data correlation piece, it could be used to do target selection and identification. It could also be used to create payloads and things like that. Now, again, a lot of the public AI will have, I guess guardrails in there to prevent the use of the AI to create, malicious payloads. But that doesn't mean that other AI, well, not that doesn't mean that all AI has the guardrails in place. Um, and so because of that, and because of it, it says here about obfuscation, but also because it could make novel malware, the use of AI is going to create risks around the I guess, ability to defend against it because it's something that hasn't been seen before, potentially, if it's going to be creating new things. We also have, honeypots and DOS attacks. So basically, traditional honeypots, AI can assist in obfuscating them again from detection. Um, we've also got, I guess they could be made, well, honeypots can also be made more realistic. But then attackers may use AI to detect decoys. So yeah, this is kind of that back and forth sort of thing. So, they can be made realistic, so they become more attractive, but then AI could be used to detect that they're actually honeypots. AI can also optimize application layer, um, pressure and dependency choke points as well. So certainly, yeah, DOS attacks. All right, I really need some water. It's hot in here. All right, I'm just going to press on because I think we're kind of getting a bit pushed for time. So AI in automating security tasks. So if we look at, I think I've covered off a little bit of this already, but basically AI is a, pretty powerful ally when it comes to automation. And so we can streamline tasks. We can use the integration piece, as I mentioned before, so we can integrate with other systems. And we can do things like, as I said, AI summarization, so that can help analysts look and identify critical elements in a particular scenario or situation. AI in DevSecOps can do things like continuous security integration. Um, and the ability to do this automation of security tasks is going to be quite powerful. So if you look at the different, I guess, options here, so AI and ML to process input data faster to produce output data. Okay, I think we talked about that one to death. It just sounds like it's reworded. Reduce human requirement in creating code and importing data into models. So we've got a few options here. We've got no code platforms. So, no code basically produces code. It does produce code, but it doesn't require somebody to code anything. So if you look at, as an example, something like Wix, Wix website development tool. I haven't used it in ages. I mean, it's not an AI specific tool. I mean, it may have some AI features in it nowadays, but I haven't used it in a long time. But it generates the code for you. So you just like drag and drop stuff, you put it how you want it, and all the code is created behind the scenes. So when we talk about AI and its use, it could basically do the same thing. So there's no code, all the code is created by the AI. Then we've got low code environments. So, there's some low code environments used today. I probably say that I've gone from a high code to almost a low code environment. I mean, there's still lots of code, but it's now supplemented through the use of, um, AI tools to help with, some of the more not complex stuff. In fact, the complex stuff I still need to do a lot of deal with, but yeah, some of the like, can you what was the example I had? Oh, the example I had was I had an old tool that I wanted to port into something new. So I just basically pointed at that and said, can you just put that into there and just make it look nice? And it did it. So that was pretty cool because that saved me having to do it again. Um, but yeah, this is really common in things like pre-built dashboards. There's also, with low code. You have to think about things like rollback and error handling as well. I think for me, I will use something like a code repository. So if I need to roll back, I can roll back easily rather than, just having one copy. I think there are rollback options in the AI tools as well. And then, yeah, summarization. So basically, this is where I think we've talked about summarization a bit. It's also a bit repetitive, but taking those large amounts of data and spitting out effectively an interpretation of it or summarization of it. So this is something that's really going to be quite powerful, and I think will be used quite widely. What else do we have? Security workflows, so process, predefined, automated, and designed. Yeah. Okay, I guess look, the crux of it here is about, improving response time, reducing mistakes. And when you think about like if you've got a security event that's happening, like a security incident, like a live incident that's playing out, there's usually a lot of pressure and a lot of time pressure. Um, Often it happens at really annoying times of the day, so it's probably quite late. So people are tired. So the use of AI in security workflows can help reduce any mistakes as well. So because machines don't get tired. Um, so yeah, that's probably one good example of how this can help. So by integrating AI into those security workflows, it could also be integrated into DevSecOps. Um, so basically connecting it to code repositories and so forth, doing automated security checks, compliance, continuous monitoring. I think, as I mentioned earlier, if you're going to connect it and put in automation and so forth, you need to make sure that you've got some guardrails in place, make sure that you're doing, good cyber hygiene, cyber practices around things like least privilege. And then also audit trails are really important too. So it's going to be doing, and look, I think more broadly, audit trails are really important so that you can understand who or what made the decision or the change. So that's going to be obviously applicable to DevSecOps as well. But some of the things that you can do with DevSecOps, you could look at the continuous integration, continuous deployment processes, so your CI/CD processes, unit testing, model testing, all that sort of stuff. Regression testing is probably a big one. So regression testing, looking at what may have broken after something's changed. So rather than manually going through and doing that, AI can do that for you. And then, yeah, automating rollbacks and so forth. Um, I feel like that's just kind of covering over this stuff again. Um, what have we got here? I feel like this is just more of that. Uh, oh, okay, cool. And then what do we got here? Yeah, sorry. I think that's just explaining I didn't realize that that's just a high level, and then the details were coming. Um, but I think that's pretty much it. There was a lot of slides in this pack.
How many slides, George?
40.
Jeez.
I know. And then I was like, I'm starting to panic because I'm running out of, can you tell? I'm like, I'm starting to go really fast because I'm like, oh, it's 10
That's all
past,
right. That's right.
10
That's
past
right.
8.
That's right. Well, how many do we have left, or do you reckon
No,
we
that was
call
it.
that was it? Okay, cool. All right. I reckon what we'll do, we'll give it about 5 minutes to see if anyone else has questions. We've got three questions here. So we've got here from Vemshi V. Hi, George. Could you please explain or expand on using MCP? Is it the office work or personal? What security controls have you been implemented in the environment to ensure the risks prompt injection, shadow MCP, over privileging are prevented or avoided? It's a big question.
So I'm using MCP, as it, I've
Hmm.
just started sort of really playing with it. I'm using it for my kind of own stuff.
Yep.
Oh, the question disappeared. Oh, there we go.
Yep. Oh,
Sorry, because it was quite long.
that's right.
So I'm using it for my own stuff. As I mentioned,
Hmm.
I'm probably more making sure that whatever it's connecting to, that I'm. So if I look at connecting it to like DevOps, for example, so
Hmm.
code repository, I have to create like a token that allows MCP to connect to it. And then
Hmm.
I configure MCP to use that particular token. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of following a lot of the best practice security hygiene stuff. So in other words, I'm
Hmm.
limiting what it has access to. So it only has access to very specific things. I'm
Hmm.
also not allowing it at the moment, just because I'm sort of playing with it to write back. So I'm just basically saying, oh, you can read this particular
Hmm.
repository. So really it's kind of down to more governance from my end to make
Hmm.
sure that, I'm controlling what it has access to and what it can do.
Yeah.
Um, and then I'm using, like a normal AI tool to sort of connect to it. So I'm using it. So prompt injection and so forth really isn't an issue for me in this specific scenario because I'm using
Yeah.
the tool to do things like look at my repository and um,
Mhm.
you know, get it to, as I said, I used it to try and put some old code that I've written and to kind of update it and put it into another project.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. Next one, we've got two more. We got Key Hindi. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I've got here, what are the most AI resistant information security roles?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that. But look, I'd be also interested to see what other folks think on that one. I think if you ask my personal opinion, based on just kind of what I've seen,
Mm,
um, you know, over the past few years, I think that it's really where there needs to be some sort of human involvement. And
mhm,
also, and this is not going to be ideal, but basically where
mm,
context and expertise is really important.
mm,
And so I use the example of, AI is pretty, pretty good at writing code, but
mm,
it needs to know what it needs to write in the first place.
mhm.
And also someone needs to, kind of direct it and so forth. So I think any role where there needs to be a, human in, that almost has kind of like architecture type roles, are probably, pretty good. By the way, don't hold me to that because I don't know what's around the corner. But those types of roles where you need, human oversight, context, the kind of, yeah, those are the types of roles I think that are, still going to be needed for quite a long time.
Yeah. No, absolutely, 100%. Um, got Martin here. Based on the question, ranking of importance. So I've got CompTIA Security, then CISA, and then SecAI. So out of those, which one goes importance, like from 1 to 3?
Well, they're different. So, I mean, SecAI Plus is one of those expansion ones, right?
Mm,
So I think like, and some of the stuff that I've mentioned um, really falls under a lot of the, what's the word, fundamental security
mhm,
practices, which would be Security Plus.
mhm,
So, while there's no prerequisites for, SecAI Plus, I think having a solid um, understanding of, basic sort of security principles and cyber hygiene and which
mhm,
will be
mm,
applicable to well, any cyber, whether it be
mm,
AI or not. Yeah,
mm,
yeah. I personally, and I kind of did. I start my first cyber cert. I think was my sorry, my first vendor neutral cyber cert
mm.
was Security Plus.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
and a lot of that is still very relevant principles today. In fact, all of it is still relevant.
Mm,
Yeah, things have changed and the context changes and so forth. But yeah, I think I personally started there. And then yeah, the other one like SecAI Plus is a bit of an extension. I haven't done much with the Cyber Sec Analyst cert.
mhm.
But again, is that an extension one? I don't, an expansion one? I don't actually know. Depends what you're trying to do because I think they're
Yeah.
different as well. So, that's a
100%.
cyber analyst one. Depends what kind of line of work you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Awesome. And I think we've got one more here from Adam. Let's have a look here. Oh, actually two. So Adam, just cautious of time, guys. So we've got about a couple of minutes. So yeah, hi George. Do you think there are overall cost and time benefits for management and companies use to AI tools for monitoring and defending attacks rather than hiring or contracting cyber attacks? Looking at from the higher levels cyber risk and governance perspective without knowing much of the technical and coding side. Thanks.
Do you think there are overall cost and time benefits
Yeah.
for management and companies using AI tools for monitoring and defending rather than hiring contracting cyber experts? Um, I'm trying to work out how to answer this question. So, are
Mm,
we? I think there are cost and time benefits for
mm,
um, well, management and companies to use AI tools for monitoring and defending. And so when you say hiring this is where I'm a little bit confused. So hiring or contracting cyber experts, I think it depends what role they're going to play.
mhm,
Certainly, I think there's use cases and benefit. Well, so there's pros and cons for both. I still think that, there is definitely a place for cyber experts, but I think that they're, as I said, I call it the superpower. I think AI can be used to augment the capabilities. So at this stage, I'm not convinced that AI can completely, and it's not because I'm trying to keep myself in a job. Um, I'm not convinced that AI can completely
Yeah.
I can do lots of things. Can
Yeah.
replace
Yeah.
cyber personnel, but
Yep.
certainly I think it will help with some of the capabilities. So again, if you think about a SOC analyst that's, going through, the eyes on glass, right? Looking at
Mm,
hundreds of thousands of, alerts and things like that,
mm,
that may potentially miss something. I think that this can help augment that ability to get the job done, which
mm,
means that they're going to be more effective. I think likewise, if you're looking at cyber experts that might be, I don't know, doing something. I'm trying to think of what else they might want to do, but uh, okay, incident response. So if you look at incident response, what may happen here is the use of AI can potentially reduce the amount of time it takes to respond and
mm,
not mitigate, uh, basically respond to an incident and,
mhm.
word escapes me. But by reducing that, that also reduced cost. So I think there still needs to be someone in the loop, but I think you are gaining efficiencies and so forth
Mm.
by using AI. So I don't think it's a direct replacement, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Fantastic. We've got one, I got two questions from Kahinde, and I think we'll leave it there for tonight, guys. So she's got two in learning AI as a technical security professional. What aspects of AI should one be learning, AI user level or AI engineering level, um, and what prerequisite learning is required for training as an AI engineer.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what. I mean, there's lots
Mm.
of qualifications and certifications and courses out there. Obviously, there's a lot of university
Yep.
um, education around, people that want to be, we'll say our engineers, like, data science and so
Hmm.
forth. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that there's prerequisite learning because it depends what you want to be doing and where you start, but certainly I think there are undergrad, I don't see if CSU, I know CSU's, I think there's some stuff that's out there, but
Mm.
I don't know, you could probably answer that one better than me.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, no.
Um,
No, we'll have to.
Shane definitely can maybe park that one for next week,
Yeah, I
but
will. Yeah,
what I was
I'll.
going to say is it depends is the bottom line.
Yeah,
You know, generally, yeah, it's going to be an undergrad or if it's on a specific platform, it could be a specific course to do it. There's definitely lots of education out there. It just depends kind of. I think I need a bit more detail. That's probably what I'm
yeah,
getting at.
yeah.
Um, in learning AI as a technical security professional, which aspects of AI should be one be? Well, yeah, look, I think it's a bit of both. So I think as a security professional, as a technical security professional, you can't not know how users use AI.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I think there's an element of understanding how users use it and interact with it and what they do and what the risks are to them. But then there's also the technical piece. So I think it's a bit of column A and probably more of column B.
Yeah, cool. All right. All right. Thank you so much for that, Shane. Yeah, I think that's it for today. Now, I do believe Lil there was a Q&A at the end that she was going to put up or a survey. Lil, are you there by any chance? Oh, is Lil there, Shane, or is she gone? Oh, George, sorry. Sorry, I thought Shane was on board. George, is Lil there that you see or no?
I mean,
Uh, is it, no, I can't
she's
see her.
online, but I don't know if she stepped away for a minute.
I don't know either. I think we'll leave it there for tonight, George. What do you reckon?
Sounds good.
Beautiful. Everyone, thank you so much. I really do appreciate everyone's time today. So again, if you have any questions, I know Lil had put it into the chat of the email. If you have any questions on your the portal that you're using, if you have any questions around that, I'll get it up one more time. Let me just go back and find it. I do apologize for this. Um, it's a big thing. Where is it here? I have to find it. Give me 1 minute, guys. Sorry about this. Yeah, so short courses at itmasters.edu.au. So that's short courses at itmasters.edu.au. If you have any questions and you need some help, please do reach out to there. But as always, thank you so much for everyone's time. I really do appreciate it. If you have any questions, do reach out to us. My name's Terry, and obviously, George, thank you so much for your time tonight. And yeah, we'll definitely reach out to those. And if you have any questions, do reach out to us. All right.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you. Oh, hello, Lil. All right. I think that's it. I'm gonna end it, Lil. Shane, thank you. George, thank you.